Chris Rampelmeyer, Rachel Petty, and Courtney Jones. Always fun.
Venerable.
Thank you, Right Reverend Sir. You should be. A resolution for the ministry of St. Luke's. Whereas since 1951, the people of St. Luke's have shared God's love with their neighbors in good times and bad, disciples creating disciples as a mission congregation in the Diocese of Northwest Texas. Whereas over those years, the light of Christ shone through this congregation, a beacon in the level land. Whereas in the Llano Estacado, they know when the seasons turn, and after 8 years as a true shepherd of the flock, the Reverend Jim Walker is ready for retirement and travel. And after 71 years, St. Luke's has recognized that it is time for its physical mission in level land to conclude. Whereas for its faithful people, St. Luke's life is changed, not ended, as the congregation remains in community and looks to sell their building to another denomination so that their home may remain a house of God. Be it resolved by this 64th Annual Diocesan Convention of Northwest Texas that we honor and celebrate the life of St. Luke's Episcopal Church and the work of generations of its families, that work living on through its members and in those whose lives they changed.
This resolution is titled, Peopling Tables, What's a QR Code, and the Future of the Church. It's a resolution thanking Texas Tech Canterbury. Whereas you have made manifest in our presence the reminder that the church, being in Christ, is perpetually a new creature. Old things are passed away, and behold, all things are new. Whereas you've set up tables, decorated tables, broken down tables, moved tables, reset tables, and decorated tables. Whereas you've faithfully staffed the vendor booths selling rosaries, prayer cards, shirts, hoodies, bumper stickers, purses, candles, and souls? That sounds like quite an indulgence. Whereas you shepherding us through the process of electronic voting has reminded us not only that you are our future, but you have leadership to offer to us today. Whereas we acknowledge that you have served not only a practical function, but also a spiritual function in our midst, and that we would have been wrecked without you. Resolved by this 64th Annual Convention of the Diocese of Northwest Texas, for your service to us, for your faithfulness, and for your prophetic leadership among us, this body offers the Canterbury students and Mother Leanne our great thanks. This resolution is titled The Angels Hidden in Evangelism, Making Disciples for God's World. Whereas the Right Reverend Bishop Scott Mayer returned from his world tour this summer to bring back a good word to us at this 64th Convention of the Diocese of Northwest Texas. Whereas while it was a cool October morning in Lubbock, the bishop gave a sermon on the word most likely to make Episcopalians sweat, evangelism. Whereas despite the fact that the word reverend has within it the words revere and end, and bishop contains within it the root words hop and shop. Bishop Scott's birth into this world was all gift and grace to him, and incidentally, also to us. Whereas the theme of this convention is God's church for God's world, the bishop reminded us that the core mission of the church, making disciples who love, not making a bigger church, not making converts, not being saved, but instead making disciples who love, making peace, making justice, making changes in God's world, making the world a better place. Whereas we are encouraged to be disciples making disciples regardless of our affiliations, the bishop did allow that the world would be a better place with more Episcopalians. Whereas we recognize that, though in asking us to evangelize, you've asked us to do something difficult for us, at least you haven't asked us to do the impossible, which is read responsively by whole verse. Resolved by the 64th Convention of the Diocese of Northwest Texas, that while we cannot make hamburgers like McDonald's, chocolate like Cadbury, watches like Rolex, cars like Toyota, cannot preach like Peter or pray like Paul, we can tell the love of Jesus, who kicked down the door to save us all.
We're going to see if my technology works. A resolution on Bishop David Bailey's presentation. Whereas the Right Reverend David Bailey saw fit to leave the hellacious landscape of Arizona and make his way east to the not quite frozen tundra of Northwest Texas. Whereas he experienced firsthand the lofty heights of Texas panhandle hospitality, or what might fairly be described in other circumstances as hostage-taking, let it be known that he was offered not one but 2 pieces of chocolate cake at dinner last night. Whereas the deputies to this summer's General Convention spoke of the emotional impact of presentations by the delegation from Navajo land and how the Spirit of God moved through those present as we began to understand how we have continued to cause harm in our Indigenous siblings, even into the present day. Although it should be noted that the said same deputies also made the job of parliamentarian of the General Convention sound kind of cool, and therefore their judgment is highly suspect. Whereas Bishop Bailey extended grace to us by noting that although some among us wear funny hats, none of us are wearing black hats. And whereas we did not cause the problems faced in Navajo lands through our direct actions, we are indeed part of systems that have profited by opposing God's children for centuries. Whereas the Episcopal Church has been open to the incorporation of Navajo spirituality into the practices of worship and Christian community, we in Northwest Texas recognize that our ordinations will never be as cool as those with a medicine man participating. Be it resolved by the 64th Annual Convention of the Diocese of Northwest Texas to no longer send crews of able-bodied and the slightly arthritic to paint orphanages without first establishing relationship and dialogue with the beloved children of God in Navajo lands, and learning how we can best help each other and learn from the experience, the wisdom, and the connection to creation that Navajo Land Area Mission has to offer, so that as we strive to heal the injustices of the past and the wounds of the present, that we will see and understand how much we gain from the just and free exchange of resources and ideas between God's children. Gotta get all the way to the top. And now we have a resolution in faint praise of the Planning Committee of the 64th Annual Diocesan Convention of Northwest Texas. Whereas we come again to the end of another convention, and we acknowledge that someone probably did something to make all of this happen. Whereas apparently it's not that hard of a job because year in and year out, motions are passed, committees report, and speakers do speaking, all with minimal hiccups and roadblocks. Whereas we listen, we learn, and we worship, and when those sometimes tedious activities have ended, we eat, drink, and dance. Honestly, we're all adults. We know what we're doing, so how much effort could it possibly take to pull this off? Although I'd like to point out that I received only one mayo packet with my sandwich and Becky got two, but other than that glaring injustice, things went pretty smoothly. Whereas regardless of how easy it must be to plan and direct this convention, we suspect there may be tensions among the committee members. Time and time again, Mike, Elizabeth, Anna, Leanne, and Renee are tasked with making sure that this happens. But this year, some of the planning committee has gone to drastic and dramatic lengths, including lengthy hospital stays and life-threatening illness, just to get out of serving. Whereas this leads us to charge this committee to step it up on the interpersonal relations, to work harder to get along and play well with others. Regardless of these obvious shortcomings, be it resolved that we, the delegates of this convention, do stand in awe of your many miracles, and most especially the miracle you have performed in getting this august assembly, this silver-haired session, this venerable collection of church nerds and masochists to participate, albeit grudgingly, in the miracles of technology, the roaring lion of electronic interaction, and vote with their phones. Whereas our math teachers were wrong when they told us to learn that number stuff because you won't always have your calculator in your hand. Not only do we hold that calculator close to us at all times, we now all have QR code readers, and we sort of know how to use them. Thanks be to God.
It's still going. A resolution on the bishop's cheerful charge. Whereas over the years, there's been an expectation that courtesy resolutions in this diocese will be amusing. Whereas the bishop's charge challenges not only this expectation, but challenges us as Episcopalians. Whereas if I said it was easy finding humor in the 5 systemic crises identified by Archbishop Welby, I'd be lying. Whereas with the hoarding of science and technology, climate change, religious extremism, economic injustice, and a culture that seeks to construct itself without God, for crying in a bucket, we have a holy problem. But whereas the gospel is bad news before it's good news, and Good Friday becomes before Easter, the sin of the world is never so overwhelming as to extinguish hope, and never so powerful as to keep God's church from working for and recreating God's world. And whereas we must seize the day before we become one more monument forgotten to those who follow, those who will not remember us, but may remember how we as a community face these sins of the world and kick the door down. Be it resolved by this 64th Annual Diocesan Convention of Northwest Texas that we choose love, we choose forgiveness, and we choose self-sacrifice. And as our world is burning, we will not hold back but rush in, for we are saved already. And Bishop Mayer, serving with you has been our greatest privilege. Isn't that funny? One more. Thanks for the encore. Yeah. A resolution on the wearing of hats. Whereas our bishop wore 2 hats, but he's giving one of them to the Right Reverend Andy Doyle of the Diocese of Texas. And whereas we wonder when Elizabeth Jones has the time to wear all of her hats, including that of acting secretary to the convention, serving in place of Michael Pollan, as that world traveler was delayed long enough to miss working the first day of the convention, but conveniently arrived in time for the dinner dance. Whereas Canon Mike Emer not only has a collection of various hats, but apparently he's the guy to see if you need money for one of your hats or for funding a mission diocese. Whereas, speaking of money, our diocesan finance manager, Anna Mora, who also dons much technological headwear, a calm presence in a storm of otherwise competent adults trying to connect to the internet, scan QR codes, and vote electronically. Does anyone miss the goldenrod colored paper like I do? Whereas I could go on, but I don't want to push anyone's buttons. Be it resolved by this 64th Annual Diocesan Convention of Northwest Texas that we see you, we appreciate you, and hey, can you do just one more small thing before we go? No, just kidding. We thank you.